Hey Nick, how you doing?
Good, thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here as well. So I have a very good friend of mine who's from New Zealand, and I've been properly trained, and I know that a kiwi is a bird, and a kiwi fruit is a small kind of hairy green
That's
fruit that
right.
sometimes can be quite bitter. um, so she would smack me. Hello, George, if you're listening. She would smack me every time I called her a kiwi. And just so, how are you doing down in New Zealand these days?
Pretty good. Yeah, it's always a bit weird. I lived in the Northern Hemisphere for quite a while, and I now kind of understand the backwards seasons, backwards to me. So it's always a bit weird, being down here in summer while everyone else is talking about snow and cold and stuff.
Yeah,
And Christmas is coming up, and
right.
here it's barbecue on the beach weather.
Yeah. That would be hard to get to. Yeah, but you grew up with that, so that was normal, right? Or was Christmas
Yeah,
and all of that a big part of your life as a child?
Yeah, I think so. And somehow it never really struck me as odd that all the Christmas cards had, robins and sleighs and snow and stuff on them.
Uh-huh.
It was, yeah, we always celebrated it though.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Tell me about that. I would love to talk to you first about growing up in New Zealand and what that was like. Tell me, like, what was the area you grew up in? Were you in a city? Were you out in the country? And what was your family up to at that point?
Yeah, I grew up in Christchurch, which is where I'm living now as well, actually, after a long hiatus. It was, it's a smallish city, 300,000 people at
Is
the
that on the
time.
north? That's the North Island, correct?
No, the
Where
South
Auckland is
Island.
south. Oh, and is Auckland north?
Auckland's top of the north, basically,
Okay. Yeah.
just
Sorry, I had
about.
those reversed.
Yeah. You may have heard of Christchurch because of the massive earthquakes that caused so much damage here, of course, about a decade ago.
Hmm. And
But yeah, it was a nice place to grow up, and I'm sort of a what's it called, a geriatric millennial. So growing up, the internet wasn't really a thing to start, and it only sort of developed when I was a teenager. It became accessible to end users when I was a teenager. And so that was sort of transformative for me, and I think it's really changed New Zealand's place in the world as well, just being so much better connected given how physically distant we are.
yeah, that's one thing I was curious about. Growing up in Christchurch, what were the expectations of you, like from your parents, or just in general, like the vibe of like, was it like expected that you had to go to Auckland or to Sydney or to Hong Kong to like to get a job, or what was that like in that community?
Growing up, it was very much not the case. That you're expected to leave. But I guess like I wasn't heavily involved with, or my family wasn't heavily involved with tech stuff beyond my own interests,
Mhm.
so we didn't really see that sort of end of things. And it is or was kind of the case that if you're working in tech, there's a pretty high chance that somebody's going to try and hire you to another country because there is a tech scene in New Zealand, but it's not that big. And places overseas tend to be more prestigious and pay more often.
Yeah, and um, so was it kind of idyllic? Were you out in the countryside, running around with the sheep? And is it true that there are still more sheep in New Zealand than people?
Oh yeah, there's something like 10 times as many sheep as there are people, but they're not evenly distributed. So, I was very much a suburbs sort of city kid, really.
And did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have a brother and a sister who are both my sister is 5 years younger than me, and my brother's 2 years younger than that.
Okay. Did you guys get along?
Yeah, I think like they were born sufficiently late in the game that I was very much the big brother,
Mm.
sort. So there wasn't really any direct competition between me and them, but they certainly bickered.
Yeah. Did you take to that role, like the big brother, kind of like overseeing them, kind of in a bit?
I think so. Yeah, there was never like a sort of a loco parentis type thing. It was very much Big Brother rather than parent instead.
Mhm.
But yeah, it made it a pretty easy relationship.
And did they go into tech as well?
No, my sister's a photographer, and my brother works for a major gun company selling to clubs and businesses around New Zealand.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah. Quite different.
Yeah.
And what were your parents doing back then?
My mum's always worked in the charity sector, and my dad did a variety of sort of management type roles in different companies, consultancies, and so forth.
Okay. In doing some research on you, one of the fun things I came across was an article from 1997 on CNN,
yes,
where they interviewed you because you claimed that you had come up with a fix for the Y2K bug.
It's slight overstatement. I claimed that I'd come up with a fix for one very specific part of the Y2K bug, which was true. I wrote like a reasonably straightforward program that when you ran it on a home PC, would basically each boot it would detect what date the computer thought it was and correct it to the correct date, because I noticed that PCs whose BIOSes weren't upgraded would like jump back 20 years, and I'm like, well, that's easy. You just run some tests, see how far it jumps back, and then adjust that on every boot to the correct time. So it solved a small issue that, like, if you had a PC that you hadn't upgraded, or you couldn't upgrade, and wasn't going to work post 2000, now it would. But I guess the 14-year-old tech genius narrative is just too tempting for like the media to pass up. So it very quickly ballooned from 14-year-old writes cool program to help home PCs into 14-year-old solves Y2K bug single-handedly.
Yeah, damn that media. Reading it, and this was 1997. It made me chuckle because they used the example if right after a second after midnight on Y2 2000, the year 2000, if you're in New York and you called your friend in Los Angeles where the year hadn't changed and the phone company hadn't updated its software, it might charge you for a phone call lasting 99 years.
Or alternately refund you one that lasted negative 99 years.
Yeah, right. So I remember Y2K pretty well. I was a young adult, and we were with all my friends in Morro Bay, California, which is kind of a secluded part of the Central Coast in California, just in case, everything went down. But of course, nothing happened, and it was really quite a non-event. But okay, so 1997, you said you were 14 at that point. Mm-hmm. So how many years prior to that had computers kind of come into your life, and like, how did you, when did you start like tinkering with code, and how did you even get into that? If your dad's kind of in management consulting and your mom's in the charity sector, was it just something that was completely self-directed, or did you have someone in your life that kind of pointed you in this direction?
I pretty much owe it to my granddad on my mum's side, and he was always into tech and stuff, and so he had even pre Intel PCs, he had like an Amstrad, which was a very early sort of akin to the Commodore personal computer, and he showed it to me and I was immediately hooked. And so he helped me get my first computer at age 8, and he helped me start to learn my first programming language at the same age. And I kind of just, took off from there.
Was that C then? That was about it?
No, this was Amstrad Basic.
Okay.
Yeah, it was possible to program the Amstrad in assembly. I'm not sure if there was a C compiler for it. But I was very much at the basic end of things at that point.
And what was it as an 8-year-old that just grabbed you about that?
I don't know. I guess I have an analytical mind. I like to solve problems by breaking them up into parts and analyzing them and figuring out the best ways to do them. I've always had an interest in I guess algorithms and that sort of thing, and so this just scratched all those itches. It was like, I can make this thing do what I want it to, and what's more, once I've done that, I can give that to someone else and it'll continue doing it, and they don't have to know how I built it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a permanence to it, right? That's a very alluring.
Yeah.
Do you play chess?
I know the rules and I've played it a few times, but I'm definitely not a player.
Okay. Yeah, breaking up a problem into pieces and trying to solve those pieces made me think of chess. I'm playing a lot with my sons now, and they're kicking my butt, so it's not fun. Help. Um, okay, so, and then I also noticed that you're a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons, and that you like to make your own set, like, well, pieces, and I guess I'm not sure what to call it, but was that something that you got into back in that same time period, sort of like 8 to 14?
No, that was sort of a lot later when I first went to uni and I met some basically other nerds, and they played D&D, and so I sort of got into it a bit as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember being a kid, probably I was about 8, and I think 1980-ish when D&D sort of, I think, got real popular, and I was on vacation with my parents at our grandparents' house in Pennsylvania. It's pretty rural, and I got my dad to buy me a D&D kit, and he and I tried to play D&D with just 2 people. It was a total disaster. But when the pandemic came around with COVID, I kind of reconnected with a lot of my college buddies who all have kids, a bunch of boys basically, and we all started playing once a week on the D&D Beyond, which was really fun and kind of something that sort of, it definitely gave me something to look forward to throughout the weeks. Have you ever done that online?
Yeah, so I sort of dropped D&D after I left uni and then got back into it when I was living in the UK. Met an amazing group of people there, and we played in person. But when I moved to New Zealand, or back to New Zealand rather, we started playing online a bit using D&D Beyond and Roll20 and stuff.
Yeah.
And then since then, I've picked up a local group, but we're distributed around New Zealand, so we also play online. It's incredibly effective at like actually getting people together reliably and being able to play. Like, if I could, I would play in person, but this is still, it's almost as much fun as being there, and it's way easier to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. If anyone is curious about it, you should definitely check it out. Okay, so like from 14 now, you're hooked on computers. You're getting interviewed as a child genius by CNN. What's your path? What are you thinking? Like, do you know at that point that computers are what you want to do with the rest of your life, or how are you thinking about it back then?
Oh, I pretty much knew that from age 8 when I first started learning to program. By age 14, it was definitely, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do school, and then I'm going to go to uni and get a degree in computer science, and then I'm going to be a software engineer, or probably programmer, I thought at the time. And, which is more or less what I did, except that I never finished the degree because I got a part-time job working in software during my first year, and that sort of gradually ate up more and more time until, I'm actually a professional software engineer full-time.
Yeah. Yeah, so you just kind of, you just started doing it, right? Sounds like.
Pretty much, yeah. There wasn't a whole lot of computer education at high school at my age, when I was there, so I kind of had to self-teach in large degree.
And were you still in Christchurch at this point, or had you gone somewhere else?
Yeah, I didn't leave until after I'd started working professionally.
Okay. Did the the big .com bubble and bursting have any effect on you, or what did you make of all of that, being sort of like you were right in the scene at that point?
Yeah, and it definitely, I watched it happen, but it's sort of at a distance, as it were. Like, I don't really recall it affecting the company I was working at that much. But it was, obviously it had enormous impacts on, larger companies and in the US and so forth.
And then, okay, so, and then just keep going. Tell me about your path. Like, what was intriguing to you, and what was like making you want to continue on with computer science and what you were doing in the programming world? Were you still solving problems like you liked to do as a kid?
Yeah, I think so. I guess, in retrospect, my first professional job was a little mundane, it was building fairly straightforward stuff. But at the time, it was all new to me, and it was an opportunity to sort of flex and expand my skills. Yeah. At the same time, I was doing computer science at uni, and although I didn't finish the degree, it definitely gave me a much more solid foundation in computer science principles, which, I didn't really know that well when I first started, but was something that like really appealed as something to learn, that I found really engaging. Um, and after about 4 years working at this company, I got offered a job at a company in Seattle. So I decided to go work for them. That didn't really work out. So I came back to New Zealand, worked some more in the software industry here, before a couple of years later getting a job offer from Google in Dublin, Ireland, which I did take up. And that was my first proper international move.
Yeah. What were you doing for Google?
So my first role at Google was SRE, Site Reliability Engineer. So I was one of the team that got pinged at 6 a.m. when, when Bigtable went down, because I was on the Bigtable team. And like, to be honest,
for those of us who don't know, like me, what's Bigtable?
Oh, Bigtable is a big non-relational database that Google pioneered that is basically capable of storing billions of records across an entire cluster of computers with effectively unlimited access and updates and so forth. It's sort of one of the first, large distributed NoSQL databases.
Is that what made Google so fast and so reliable?
It's used for some of their stuff. Basically, anything that needs regular updates, like the search index, for instance, isn't on Bigtable because they, at least back in the day, they indexed it periodically and then pushed the whole update, and distributed that. And it doesn't need to be updated live. But then they had like another index on top of that just for the latest documents, and that sort of stuff was hosted on Bigtable.
Okay.
Some of their, most of their offerings, like Gmail and so on, were built on top of Bigtable.
Okay. Yeah, I've asked other people this because as I remember, Google, the thing that really set them apart, and this might be apocryphal, I'm not sure, but it was that Sergey Brin and his co-founder, whose name I'm spacing on. Yeah, Larry Page. That they came up with this idea of like having a bunch of hardware in parallel, and that's what made it super fast and accurate. Am I on the right page with that? Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, they've published some papers on it, and yeah, I think you're thinking about the way Google search worked at the time. I have no idea what it's like today, but basically, yes. So you would make a query, and it would split it up into, a couple of hundred shards, and each one was responsible for answering that query for one particular part of the database. And so they would all do that in parallel, and then they'd send their responses back, and those would be synthesized together into the final result.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Was that a big culture shock for you going from New Zealand to Dublin, Ireland?
Yeah, definitely. Going from a city of 300,000 and a country of, under 4 million to a city that had more people in it than my entire country, had a big impact. It was a sort of a density that I hadn't really encountered before. And the work environment was quite different too, because everywhere I'd worked prior to then had no more than sort of 20 people max in the company. And suddenly I was, on one floor of one building of a campus that was one of many campuses around the world,
Yeah. Another thing I enjoyed reading about you is that you like to brew your own beer at home.
I do.
Any chance that Guinness in Dublin kind of started a love affair with you with that?
It's funnily enough, no. There were a couple of other SREs who liked to brew, but I didn't really cotton on to it at the time. It was only after I came back to New Zealand that I really started to play around with homebrew. Okay. And it was actually sort of getting back together with my brother when I'd been away for so long and us picking it up as a joint hobby.
What kind of beers do you like to brew? What's one of your favorite styles, I guess?
I think I like making, sort of easy to drink sort of summer lagers and stuff like that. I particularly like, there's a local brewery that does a ginger infused beer, and I've always been trying to replicate it. But the thing that really set homebrewing apart for me was hazy IPAs, because when homebrewers first started picking up on them, they just weren't available in the shops. And, I don't know about over there, but here, they've just gone crazy for it. Every third beer on the shelves now is a hazy.
Yeah, I can confirm that here in the US as well. It's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. But back then the only way you could get them was to make them yourself. And
Okay.
they're also a beer that doesn't travel very well, in fact. So even now, if you make them yourself, they'll probably be substantially better than what you can get on the shelves.
Yeah. I've been known to drink a beer or two in my day, and I've been curious. Like, I've been drinking IPAs now for years and years, and I've wondered if it's ever going to kind of tap out. Sort of like, if you remember the movie Sideways, it sort of like gave Merlot a bad name, and nobody wanted to drink Merlot for a long time. But it doesn't seem like IPAs are going anywhere. It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it's a bit funny though, because like a hazy IPA is so unlike a regular IPA in taste that it almost doesn't deserve the label, you know.
Yeah, and you can infuse so many like grapefruit flavors or other things that are just really nice in there.
Yeah.
So it definitely takes it away from the sort of like bitter kind of IPAs that we were getting back 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so while you were at Google, when did crypto sort of first cross your radar? Was it while you were a software engineer at Google, or did it come after that?
It was actually my second stint at Google because, amongst moves between countries, staying at Google, I left and then I came back again. And after coming back, I'd been working for a while, this time as a software engineer. And I got an email from a headhunter for a large financial services firm saying, hey, would you like to come work for us on Ethereum? And I sort of went, well, no, this sounds like a really boring place to work, but what's this Ethereum thing? Let's take a look. And I started playing around with it and was like, I'd come across Bitcoin a couple of years earlier and been like, oh, this is cool, but it's kind of just money, it's not like that programmable and flexible, which I always thought would be the cool thing about a decentralized system like that. And so then I came across Ethereum and I was like, whoa, this is exactly what I've been thinking about, that would be really nice to have. And it's something I'd, speculated about for a long time, like before Bitcoin came along, just thinking about how nice it would be to be able to do that sort of distributed, trustless computation.
Yeah.
So it really appealed. And I started writing code on it and, building libraries and stuff. And next thing I know, the Ethereum Foundation is reaching out about a job.
So what was it about that decentralized sort of underpinning architecture that appealed to you? Why did you want that? You had been at one of the biggest centralized sort of tech companies in the world, right? At Google. Was it, were you feeling like, I'd like to give people more control over what they're doing, or where were you coming at it from to want to make a more decentralized sort of architecture the norm?
I wish it was quite that noble, but honestly, I'm just fascinated with computer science and algorithms and building distributed systems. I've played around with the more mundane P2P systems and stuff like that, and I love the idea of building a system that's more than the sum of its parts, building one that runs in a decentralized, distributed fashion without having anybody who's centrally controlling it, because doing that is fundamentally harder, but it means that everyone is kind of an equal participant in the system. You can build a system that scales beyond its creator. And I don't know, that just fundamentally seems much more interesting and valuable to me than writing some API that's served from a web server in a data center.
And to be fair to Bitcoin, I mean, that is what Bitcoin kind of introduced to the world, right? It was that sort of unstoppable, distributed system. But again, like so many people I've spoken to in the Ethereum world, they quickly got bored of how limited it was and wanted to do more. And that's why Ethereum really kind of grabbed them. And so once you had this sort of canvas in front of you with Ethereum, and it was a distributed system, what was your first impulse of like, oh, I want to try to build this?
One of the first things I built was basically developer tooling. I wrote a library for manipulating strings in Solidity because there was nothing around to already do that, and various people needed it. And I've always sort of been drawn to building infrastructure and developer tooling and stuff like that, which seems unglamorous, but it sort of really exercises those muscles for me around, building infrastructure, building algorithms, making things sort of neat and tidy, I guess.
Yeah. No, we had Kosala Hemantchandra on the show a couple weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
He used my Ether wallet. Same thing. Like the wallet didn't exist, or like he was just getting in there on the test net and building things that did not exist yet. And it's quite amazing. It's hard for me to kind of think of a parallel in the world of when you can get in on something like this and just actually start building the nuts and bolts of it. And that's one thing as a reporter and a writer that I've been fascinated by, is watching this ecosystem evolve and grow right in front of my eyes. Like I know how the traditional financial world works, and exchanges and, investors and banks, and seeing that all kind of repurposed in a peer-to-peer fashion has just been really fascinating.
Yeah, for me too.
So, okay, you realized Ethereum's not a boring place to work, and the foundation eventually came out was that Ming Chan's era when she was there?
Yes.
Okay. And what were they coming to you for? What do they want you to help them with?
Well, they had openings in a couple of core teams, and they were basically like, which of these would you like to work on? And so the offers were basically the Swarm team building decentralized storage, and the Go Ethereum team building the core client. And at the time, I went for Swarm, partly because I was so new to all of this, and I was like, well, the network's there, it's working. Like, how much can there really be to do on the core client? And how wrong was I,
Right.
And so I worked on Swarm for a little while, and that was sort of when ENS originated. But as a main job, like I didn't have the same vision for Swarm as the Swarm team, so I ended up moving over to the Go Ethereum team and working on the Go Ethereum client instead.
And did Swarm morph into IPFS, or was that a completely different project?
Their IPFS is a separate effort that started around the same time as Swarm, I want to say, maybe a bit earlier.
But that was Consensus? Am I correct that IPFS came
no,
out of Consensus?
IPFS is its own separate thing.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So you're back at the Go client, and now you've had the ENS idea. Maybe just tell everybody what ENS is and what, in my opinion, it's probably the most successful application that's come out of Ethereum or out of Web3, in my opinion, because it's just, it's so widely used, and it's such an easy, or it makes the user experience so much easier. So I love it. I have an ETH address, and anyway, but let's just take a step back and tell everybody what the Ethereum name system is all about.
And you raised usability. That really is its core goal. Basically, ENS is at its core a way to name decentralized resources, whether that's your Ethereum address or your Bitcoin address or a website you're hosting on IPFS or or any number of other decentralized storage systems. Its goal effectively is to make sure that nobody has to deal with 0x blah 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 blah, the 40 character long hex identifier or the equivalent for Bitcoin or anything else. The internet solved this back in the 80s with DNS, and it was kind of shocking to me coming into crypto that nobody had seriously tackled this for crypto. The usability was so bad in part because it was like sending people bank account numbers, only far worse.
Yeah.
And that led to usability issues. It also led to making it easier to scam people and so forth.
Or if you mess up one of those characters, right, you're screwed, and there's no recourse.
Yeah, fortunately, Bitcoin has a checksum, but Ethereum doesn't, much to my dismay. But in the end, it ought to be irrelevant because our goal is nobody ought to be typing that in the first place. You always ought to be able to use a name to refer to your identity or to your account.
Yeah, and just so people are clear, mine is MatthewL.eth, and that links to one of my Ethereum wallets. So all I have to do is type that into any transaction that I'm working on, and that's all I have to remember is MatthewL.eth, your Nick.eth, which I'm sure is really hard to remember, and so that's obviously just like way easier than like you were mentioning the 0x E591 blah 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 blah. But I guess I didn't know this before I started doing some research for this show, but you can also run websites off of an ENS. Can you tell me like how that works and why somebody would want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, so at its simplest, you can point your ENS name as an IPFS hash, and it serves the same basic purpose. You enter the ENS name into your browser, and it resolves to the IPFS content. And we also support Arweave and a couple of others. And there's sort of two ways that can work. One is that if you have a browser plugin like MetaMask that enables it, you can simply type it and it will resolve it for you the same as a regular TLD, top-level domain, that is. And if you don't, then there's eth.link and eth.limo are two gateway services. So you can add .link or .limo to the end of any ENS name, and enter it into your browser, and it will load anywhere because they're hosted as public services.
Okay. And then we keep saying IPFS, that's Interplanetary Filing System, I believe.
Yes.
And that is a distributed way of managing storage, right, for websites.
That's right.
And content, right? So now you've got your ENS, which you own directly and you control, and no one can take it from you. And then you can use IPFS as a distributed peer-to-peer. Is it peer-to-peer or?
It is, yeah.
It's okay, and it's a distributed system for hosting kind of websites. And now, so we've gone from a very centralized structure in Web 2 to a mostly or entirely decentralized way of creating content for Web 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Did that always, was that goal always in mind when you came up with the naming system idea, or has there been an evolution there towards that?
It was basically there from the beginning because I started it when I was on the Swarm team, and that was out of both my interest in naming and infrastructure and their need to have a way to name Swarm resources. So right from the beginning, there was the idea it wouldn't just be a way to name your wallet, it would be a way to point to decentralized content as well.
Okay. And then more recently, so you... and all this work began, I guess, with a grant, right, from the Ethereum Foundation, and that you won and developed the ENS project from there going forward.
More continued than began. So it started off as a sort of a side project inside the Ethereum Foundation, and it grew to the point where it was consuming all of my time at the EF, and I was no longer really contributing to Go Ethereum, and then. They said, well, this has sort of outgrown just you, and we could create a team internally, but we're sort of trying to decentralize the EF as well. So how about we give you a grant, you go off, you start your own foundation, your organization, you can use that to hire some people and start to grow it, to the size it should be. And I said that sounded good. They asked how much I wanted. I came up with some figures. Nice. Yeah. Well, I came up with some figures and they took it away, and Vitalik came back and said, that's not nearly enough. Here, have twice what you asked for. So
it's even better.
And he was long-sighted because the amount I asked for just wouldn't have worked. It was the first time I would have run a business with employees, and, it would have done a year's runway, and then we would have just been coming back to them and going, oops,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in that boat now, and I'm trying to avoid that exact situation. So, and then another thing this touches on that really fascinates me is the conundrum of digital identity in a peer-to-peer world where there are no central actors like a Department of Motor Vehicles or a passport office to vouch for you. How can ENS help with that, and how do you see that developing? Because I don't think we're there yet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think everyone's working, or a lot of people are working towards that, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah, I think there's this misperception that identity requires a central issuer, effectively. But pseudonymous identity is a thing too, and the important thing there is the persistence of the identity and the fact that you can prove you're the same person who you were talking to yesterday. And ENS enables that by allowing you to make your ENS name into a profile, into an identity that represents you, and links to your other identities around the web, whether that's your email address or your Twitter handle or whatnot. It's definitely, as you say, it's got a long way to come. But there are serious efforts along those lines, like Sign In with Ethereum, which we sponsored in conjunction with the Ethereum Foundation. and makes it possible to sign in to centralized and decentralized apps using the same credentials you use to sign transactions.
Yeah, and that could be an ENS name, for example.
Yes.
Yeah. Did it give you pause when, I think it was after the Tornado Cash situation happened with OFAC, that some people, like Jimmy Fallon and some other folks have very public ENS names, they were sent some of like the Tornado Cash or transactions. Like, obviously, did that give you pause, or is that just part and parcel of what you're building here, or how did you think about that?
I think I hope it's obvious to anyone that by giving out your ENS name, you are pointing them at the wallet it points to. And I've always said that that the privacy is a real issue on blockchains, but it's kind of for blockchains and their infrastructure to solve. Naming an account isn't intrinsically a privacy-reducing measure unless you're careless about how you do it. And effectively, not naming your account gives you the illusion of privacy. It's a little harder to track down, this long identifier to which person it's identified with. But if you're handing it out to people for payments, if you're handing it out for, see my NFC collection, NFT collection, and so forth, you're ultimately revealing it as well. You're just giving yourself the illusion that you have more privacy. So I think the real solution is proper privacy-preserving primitives rather than security through obscurity. Of course, the OFAC's reaction to Tornado Cash is somewhat dismaying because they seem to be taking the approach that financial privacy is illegal, which seems like a very backwards view to me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sides to that, but the idea that a protocol can be, deemed, which can have valid uses, is deemed completely off limits is way too overreaching, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then should we say here that like people should be very careful with their wallets, and that, you should have many different wallets if you're serious about this, and, you can have a public one where you do public things, but if you're holding a lot of crypto, you might not want that to be something that's publicly known. Do you want to say anything about that? Because I always try to like tell people, be careful because people are going to steal from you if they can.
100%. And, just to echo what you've said, that, everything on the blockchain is transparent and public. And so if you hand it out, you have to expect that people will know it and follow it and so forth. And separating things up by intent and use and just for general privacy is a really good idea. And, unfortunately, sometimes tools for that can be a little limited, mostly involving using a centralized exchange, so only they have the connection between the two accounts. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a really fundamental principle that as long as we're using an open ledger, you need to sort of take your privacy into your own hands. And in my own experience, the really tricky thing is maintaining that hygiene and that separation and not, accidentally drawing links between them that makes it obvious to anyone who cares to look that, these are the same person.
Yeah. Yeah, that is tricky. And like you were saying at the beginning, or when you got involved in the beginning of Ethereum, just building tools that didn't exist. There's still, I think, a lot of tools like that would help people mask, like accounts that they don't want people to know about, but it's also, just something that's just doesn't quite exist yet. How would, so then now, sort of the latest thing on the ENS front is you guys decided to make a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, to basically open up the governance and the control of the ENS sort of ecosystem. Can you tell me about that? Was that always your idea from the beginning, or is that something that you kind of grew into as things went along?
Yeah, so right from the very beginning of ENS, we were aware that there were some things that just needed to have sort of privileged control. We had the root, which decides what top-level domains are added and how they're governed, and we had the .eth registrar, which decides how .eth names are registered and renewed and what could be done with them. And it simply wasn't practical to make all of that immediately immutable. There were too many things that could and would change over time, upgrades and bugs and changes in price oracles and stuff like that. And our goal was always sort of maximum viable decentralization. And initially, when we started, we launched back in 2017. The only real DAO was the DAO, which had recently exploded. And so it wasn't exactly a good, reference point. So we started off with a multi-sig that, unlike a lot of multi-sigs, was actually governed by independent individuals through the ecosystem, not just team members. And with the intention that as we were able to build better governance mechanisms, and, we would. And in fact, our first goal is to remove control, and the secondary goal is to decentralize the remaining control. So, come 2021, we decided that, we looked at the state of DAOs and DAO tooling and DAO governance and went, this seems mature enough that we think we can trust.
Yeah, DAO was no longer a bad word by that point.
Exactly.
I think, right?
Yeah. So it's we can do it now. And in conjunction with that, we also made some changes to limit the power of any human over the names. So at about the same time, the key holders agreed to flip a switch that means that the .eth registrar can no longer be replaced, meaning that any name that's already registered or renewed can't be affected by anyone other than its registrant. There's no way to revoke or reassign an existing name. What the DAO can do is they can change the process for renewal and registration, but that'll only affect stuff going forward, and there'll always be a warning period.
Okay. And how did the token come into it? Was it that simply a governance tool, or were there other aspects of tokenization that you guys were looking for?
Very, very much so about the governance thing. And, again, sort of building from the best tools we had available, we wanted to meaningfully decentralize the governance. There's no robust, proof of individuality system we could use. And in my opinion, there probably never will be. And so, governance tokens of that form were state of the art for us to use. And we distributed them in the airdrop as best we could to ensure that the distribution reflected the people we thought should have the voice in the ecosystem.
Yeah. And then on a higher level, one thing I wanted to talk to you about was ENS is considered a public good, right, in the Ethereum community, and it's something that is basically helping everyone, manage their wallets and their websites and everything more easily. So, and I was struggling to think of a parallel here as well. Like there are public goods in the kind of crypto world that exist, and how do you compare it to something? Is this like a nonprofit or a charity, or what is a public good to you in your mind in the Ethereum and the Web3 world, and then what do you compare it to in the rest of the kind of traditional world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess definitely a non-profit. I guess my shortest description would probably be that a public good is something that builds infrastructure that's useful to a wide variety of people, does so in a way that is, impartial, and that gives back as much of its value to the community that uses it as possible. So it doesn't collect things it doesn't need to in terms of funds or resources, and those that it doesn't need, it uses to enhance the ecosystem. So
in the same way that a nonprofit relies on grants, like a public good in the Ethereum community or the ecosystem, how do you guys monetize, or where does revenue come from? Are you dependent still on the Ethereum Foundation, or I think because that's the sort of token economic question has always been something that's interesting as well. It's like, how do you keep these things going when it's not really, I guess you generate money by registrations and renewals, right? But is that enough to keep the lights on, or do you need to try to find other ways to, monetize?
We do, and we're very fortunate because our goal in charging registration fees isn't to make money, and it's because if all names were free, they would all be snapped up immediately and resold for ridiculous prices, and it would become impossible to use the naming system. We've seen that happen with other systems. So we have to charge a fee to sort of keep things sane, and we're quite fortunate that fee is more than enough to keep the lights on, as it were. And so, for the last couple of years, ENS has done extraordinarily well. We raised 2021. We raised revenue of over $26 million. 2022 so far is over $53 million. And that's many times what we need in order to do our operations. So there's a focus on both giving that back in public goods grants and also on starting to build an endowment for ENS, for the DAO, so that if circumstances change, our ENS's future is still guaranteed.
Oh, yeah. So like a rainy day fund or a part of the treasury management?
Yeah, it's a little broader than that in my mind, and that what I want is to build a fund that is capable of supporting ENS without revenue, so that we can make those decisions about what to do with the revenue independent of our need to survive.
Oh, I see. So more like an investment fund where you're getting a return.
Yes.
I get it. Okay. And then it's fun. It's kind of like the secondary market pops up as well, sort of like in domain names, where somebody comes to you, like somebody came to me the other day with DeCential.eth and wanted to sell it to me for 2 ETH. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. I think. Okay. So let's just zoom out a little bit. And I'm wondering, last several months, 6 months or so has been pretty hard for folks in this ecosystem. There's been a lot of big, explosive failures, going back to, Terra Luna and the depegging and going forward to all sorts of centralized lenders. And obviously FTX is the one that's probably sucking up most of the oxygen in the room these days. You've been in this a long time. How are you feeling right now? And are there any lessons here or silver linings that you're taking away from what's going on?
It on a personal basis, like it's like watching a car crash, in slow motion that you're not involved in. It's dismaying, and you want to make it happen less often, but I'm not immediately involved with it. I guess the problem is, like, I and the ENS DAO and everyone I care about can be cautious and sensible individuals who don't get exposed to these sort of things. And you can avoid that sort of impact directly, but what you can't avoid is the impact this sort of thing has on the ecosystem as a whole. Mm-hmm. The trust it destroys, the damage it does, in a wider sense, the sort of contagion it causes. And that's really dismaying to see. And I guess the only potential silver lining really is that hopefully it will further drive home to people that it doesn't matter how much you think this person or this organization is trustworthy. The whole thing we're trying to build here is to not have to trust centralized entities. It's to build a system that, trust yourself, so to speak, is the rule of the game. And hopefully it will encourage people to take that more seriously, because if everybody only sent ETH to exchanges for an on-ramp and an off-ramp and then withdrew the balance after, they wouldn't have nearly the scope for a disaster to grow this large in magnitude.
Yeah, and I'll say it again. Please do that. Use exchanges to get in and out, but don't use them for custody. Get your own wallet. Make sure that you know how to understand it and how to keep it safe. But don't leave it. You're just holding yourself out there to be one of these people who just lost a lot of money when FTX went under. And why give someone control over your own money? Keep control over your own money. That's another huge tenet here. And I'd like to echo what you said. The idea that you need to trust someone is the sort of basis for all of this. Going back to Bitcoin, was like, you don't need to trust anybody because the network and the blockchain comes in and makes those transactions trustless. And so that's, I hope people keep that in mind, that that's like kind of the core tenet of all of this, is that there's no need for trust. It's just that you need to make sure that you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
One last thing, people always say, well, everyone builds in a bear market. You seem to have gone through 2 of these now. If you guys got started in 2017, one of the, the previous bad crypto winter was early 2018 into about 2020. We're in one now. Like, are you, with your connections in the community and the people do you get a sense that that's happening now? Is the cliche actually, is there some reality to it this time around as well?
Oh, 100%. I don't actually think that people stop building during the bull market. It's just that all of that gets overwhelmed and drowned out by the noise of the speculation and stuff. And yeah, everyone I'm working with is continuing to work on their stuff because the price is noise, unless it gets to the point where you can't keep the lights on. And, my ENS, we're very fortunate that we're in a great position to continue to do that through a bear market. And I think a lot of other organizations have been very sensible too.
Okay, before I let you go, I have to ask you one last thing. In your Twitter bio, it says that you are a certified rat tickler. So go.
You know what? You're the first person to ask about that, and I'm delighted. Yeah, so it turns out there is an online course you can take on the best way to tickle rats, and this is intended for like research settings because they've discovered that rats that are relaxed and socialized do better in research. And I went, this course will take like an hour of my life, but for the rest of my life, I'll be able to tell everybody I'm a certified rat tickler. So that's what I did.
No, I got to tell you, Nick, in a million years, I didn't think this was like a serious thing.
It is a real
thing. I
thing.
thought you like had a pet rat and you like to tickle your rat or whatever.
I used
they
to
actually
as a
make
kid,
quite good pets. They do. They're pretty nice.
But I can tell you the best thing to do is you grab them gently from behind their head and then you like flip them over onto their backs and you...
little belly tickle.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a great place to leave this. How to tickle a rat in the certified fashion by Nick Johnson. Nick, thanks so much, not just for this conversation, but for what you're doing in the public good space here in Ethereum and for having this vision and for making it easier for folks to kind of get involved here and keep their stuff together. So I just want to thank you for that more broadly. And then it's also been a pleasure. And thank you for just telling us about your personal life and your journey and where you think things are headed now.
Oh, very much my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's it for this episode of Decent People. We are produced by Matt Solon. Music is courtesy of Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes. Take care.